Welcome back to another episode of Buckle Up with Simon and Brian, an ultra running conversation. How are you doing this evening, Simon? Hey, that's not your usual background. Where the heck are you?
That's not my usual background. I'm about to race Tahoe Rim Trail 100, and by the time this episode comes out, I should be done with it. So I should say the race this weekend was great. It was wonderful landscape. It was a little bit hot in town, a little bit cold at altitude. But yeah, really excited about it. It's the first time I've ever been in the Tahoe area, and I've heard so many good things about this and about the race. So it's going to be great. A little bit at altitude though, so that's not so great. But how about yourself? How are your knees?
My knees are well. I am wrapping up a summer of juniors track and field, so I'm kind of excited to get a couple hours back every morning in my own personal day. And so tomorrow night, as this comes out, last week, our little Springers track program will have had their track meet on Thursday evening, and I hope that all my participants did well and had fun and enjoyed themselves in the program. It was great to kind of showcase some of our kids against another town down the street from us. So yeah, track's wrapping up. I'm doing well. I've been running a bit and getting some miles in. This weekend I will be flagging for the Summit 200, about 100K, about 62 miles. I'll be course marking the first 6 sections of it. So I'm going to do 2 sections a day. So it's good time on feet. It's not really moving that fast, unfortunately, but it is time on feet. It's about 20 miles a day. So those should be great training days for me as well, to be up in the high country in Summit County, Colorado, all along the Continental Divide Trail and just near Breckenridge and Frisco and those areas. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I mean, Summit 200 sounds like a pretty big adventure for people that do hardcore things. For people that 100-mile is not that big of an adventure. And I think that's a good segue into our guest today, who's really a badass, absolute badass. Everything he's done is absolutely crazy, and he's not stopping anytime soon.
That's right. Gavin Woody is our guest today, and he's done it all. He dabbles in a little bit of everything, quite honestly. If you look at his ultra sign up, he's completed some of the toughest races in the world. And if those aren't tough enough, he will create something tougher and do it on the weekend by himself or with some buddies. He's getting into adventure racing. We tell some great stories about how we met. I won't even go into it because I don't want to spoil it. But we met on a weird circumstance. In 2013, I think it is. So a little more than a decade ago, we met, and we've always kept in touch. And so we've just kind of kept in touch through social media, different outlets. We're always trying to help each other up. So it's been great to get to know Gavin over the years.
Yeah, and part of the discussion was really about not just ultra marathons, but also his adventure racing, going out there. He has one, I think it's in Alaska, coming up very soon with some buddies of his. He's an ex-ranger. He's going to go out there in the wild, self-navigation, with a bunch of special force guy and ex-special force guys. So really badass, but also a guy that I think is very humble and has his heart in the right place. He is fundraising for veterans. That's something that we're talking a little bit through the programs, and we're going to provide some links in the description below, which we highly suggest you having a look and supporting him.
That's right. He's raised funds for veterans and other special or other service members. I think it's also EMS and fire personnel, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, yes, those links should be in the show notes in the bottom. We'd love for you to, if you were gonna, how I think of donations is if you were gonna sit down and buy me a cup of coffee at Starbucks for $5, $5. If we all give Gavin $5 towards his towards his fundraising, that'll go a long way. So we'd love for you to just donate $5, $10 to his organization if you can afford it. If you can afford a little bit more, he'd obviously appreciate that as well. But just think of it as a cup of coffee. Without further ado, here's Gavin Woody. Enjoy. Hey, good evening, Gavin. Thanks for coming on the show. How are you doing this evening?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Gavin, gosh, your resume is just filled with adventures. I mean, and years of it. And I want to back up to like how you found yourself in this adventure role. You're just on the 4th of July. I saw that you rode your bike to a trailhead. You climbed over a mountain throughout the night. You jumped back on the bike and you rode back home to get burgers or something like that, right? That was just like just a random weekend, right? Just kind of a regular thing, some training, and so on and so forth. So, how do you find yourself there in this space? Where did that come from? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it relatively short. But so I went to West Point. I grew up in Central California, near kind of north of Simon, and was in Boy Scouts, was an Eagle Scout, and just liked to spend time out, outside. And then went to West Point. I was an Army officer, jumped out of airplanes for a living, so Ranger School and Airborne School, and parachuted into Iraq at the beginning of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And while I was in Italy, that's where I was stationed, I got into marathoning and then Ironmans. And then once I came back from Iraq, I'd been doing a few more marathons and ran Boston. And I read Born to Run, like a lot of probably the listeners here. And also ultra marathon man. And it just, my mind was blown by just like these crazy races and, Badwater and Leadville and all these other things. So I'm like, I want to do that stuff. So about that same time, after come back to overseas and going to grad school, moved up to Seattle. And this has been an awesome playground for the last 15, 16 years. Did my first 50K. And then, it was like this progression, 50 mile, 100 mile, and, now up to like 350 miles on the Iditarod Trail. So it's just been, over a long period of time, just trying to push myself into longer and longer adventures, mostly by foot, but I've also expanded now into biking, and we can talk about kind of this adventure race that I have coming up. But yeah, I just like being outside in the mountains, and fortunately my family, my wife and two young kids, 9 and 12, also like spending time outside. So it's just now fun to just spend a lot of adventuring together.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think you're obviously being super humble. I know a lot more of the stories that you do. I think you got helicoptered off of a mountain ledge with your sister when she broke her leg. Gosh, that was a couple years ago. I mean, just some of the crazy adventures that you have done. You haven't even scratched your surface. So you're being modest, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I feel, well, to be honest, after I read, I think, those books, and started getting into trail running, I think I Googled like lowest finishing rate races around the world. And so I've been kind of just trying to tick off that list over many years. And, so things like, now I've run, Badwater and Hardrock and Tour de Gents in Italy. That's a hard one, 200 miles, 80,000 feet of climbing. The Spine Race in the UK, Dragon's Back, Barkley took a crack at that. Been on the Iditarod Trail, 350 miles on foot, bike, and ski. And like Western, UTMB. So
yeah, just a couple events. Just a couple events.
Yeah, I've been trying to, and I just like the hard ones. It's fun to test myself, and I learn something new every time. I just did Tahoe 200, was undertrained. We can talk about that, and so went into it just very conservatively, and actually learned a lot about it. It was a pretty cool experience.
I'm curious. You've done obviously some of the tough one for sure. Which one do you think are the hardest? Because you actually start with Badwater and Hardrock, which arguably, I mean, we can debate, but are not the hardest of the list that you've named. So I'm curious, what's your conclusion if people want to have bragging right based on what you've done?
Well, to be honest, the only one I haven't finished is Barkley. So,
well, sure. How far did you make it? Actually, I mean, just getting in is impressive. So
yeah, well, so the way I got in, I'll tell you a little story. So I'd have been applying to Barkley for, I don't know, 5 years or something, and never, kind of figured out how to get in and all this other stuff, and never got any traction. And then I went to Big's Backyard that Laz holds in in Bell Buckle, Tennessee, and did pretty well. So I remember I think you guys probably know it's the last man standing thing now.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, these things it kind of actually exploded after the year that I was there because we went pretty far. So it was like the first 100 miles, 24 hours, looked around and kind of remembered that first 100 miles or the first day. And then literally the second day, I have no recollection of. I mean, it was like, and now we're like 200 miles in, and all of a sudden there's like, I don't know, there were maybe 10 of us left or something. And then next thing I know, I come to, and we're like 250 miles in, 2.5 days. And it's this guy who'd won it in the past. His name's Johan, and then Courtney DeWalter, as everybody knows. And it was me. And I was like, holy cow, like what is happening? And we ran some laps together, and finally, like I just petered out and failed. And so even though, I was like DNF, I put in a pretty good effort. And so Laz, I guess he saw something in me, and so let me into Barkley the next year. Nice. So I made it. But then I didn't actually do very well. So I made it like a lap and a half. I took, I learned something new every time. I took lightweight rain gear, and it just was it was like sleeting on us, and just couldn't feel my hands, and just couldn't move fast enough in the very, kind of treacherous terrain to actually stay warm. So ended up making a call to come back safely. So, but yeah, it's definitely, that's a hard one.
What year was it actually that you did Barkley?
Oh man. Maybe 5 years ago, something like that.
So 19.
I always think about it
before the pandemic
when I was doing these things.
Yeah, I date everything based on the pandemic nowadays.
Yeah. It's
so
pre-pandemic or post-pandemic.
Yeah, it was pre-pandemic. But yeah, it's off trail, it's navigation. You're in the mountains.
Well, you would think a guy like you would have an edge, right? I mean, you were a ranger, so I would think it's the type of stuff you do.
Yeah, that's why I feel like I didn't really give it a great shot. To be honest, I thought I would move fast enough, because normally I get really warm when I am running and working hard, high output. And I just couldn't move quickly enough on that terrain. It's one thing on a trail, if you can just, you're getting cold and you can just start hammering. And because, it's wet, it was raining hard, sleeting, and you're just trying to pick your way down some steep mountain. And I just couldn't move fast enough. So yeah, I had to bail. So it was a bummer. I have, I don't know, a little bit of a dream to try to go take another crack at it at some point, but we'll see.
I was going to ask, is it like, does it bug you enough to keep it on the list of like things you want to accomplish?
Yeah, it's out there. I don't know. I haven't really been running. Running hasn't really been the priority over the last few years, to be honest. And that's why this Tahoe thing was kind of interesting, because I was like, man, I need to knock this thing out. And so, yeah, I've really been trying to do more biking, more now getting on water. Growing up in landlocked Central California, I hadn't been on the water, and there's just so much great stuff to explore around here. So I've been really getting into pack rafting, because it's an increasingly large component of these adventure races, and also just for my own just exploratory stuff. Because actually, even though I've raced a fair amount, I actually have done a lot of my own, like, kind of self-support, or like solo stuff, or with team members.
Something self-created.
Yeah, like I ran the John Muir Trail by myself, tried to break the FKT on that, but it was super smoky, and that's a story in and of itself. And we did this mountaineering thing, a buddy and I, we climbed Rainier up the Disappointment Cleaver, then went down the other side, down the Emmons, and then ran halfway around the Wonderland Trail back to the start. And then we climbed Rainier again down the other side, and then ran the Wonderland the other direction, made this kind of infinity loop thing, which now people have actually done that route, and they've been doing these infinity loops on other mountains, which is super cool. We took all of our gear, the whole thing, so rope, crampons, all that stuff, the entire thing. So it was cool to kind of do something new and creative in the mountains that combined mountaineering and the the running piece.
Yeah, that's just awesome. I love those stories. Let's dive a little bit into Tahoe for a minute, and which you haven't done before, right? If I'm correct, if I recall, but you've
Yeah,
done
it was the
Bigfoot
third
though.
one. Yeah, it was the third one. I ran Bigfoot 200 the inaugural year, and kind of funny story. I started in the back with a big backpack because I was really training for the John Muir Trail, which I had
Hmm.
attempted, I think the year prior, maybe 2 years prior, and ended up bailing at 160 miles in. And so I was really gunning to go back. And so I wanted to use Bigfoot as a training run. And so I didn't have any, drop bags or anything, just had everything on my back. And long story short, ended up winning the thing, which is kind of funny.
Hmm.
And then I ran Moab, I think also the first year, and that went pretty well. But Tahoe had been on the list. And then like COVID hit, and then I think I deferred a year, and then we had the fires, and then there was too much snow last year, so they had to push it back, and I couldn't do on the new date. So this year I was like, I just need to knock this thing out, and I was excited to do it, but I just hadn't really been doing the amount of running training that I'd done prior to these other 200s.
So what did the preparation look like for that for you on short notice, or maybe not short notice, but what kind of training went into Tahoe this year?
Yeah, I'd done a fair. I mean, I did this fat bike race in. So I've been doing more of these winter things. So
Hmm.
if you take a step back, like now I feel like I've been, fortunate to have done a lot of like I don't know, um, the mountain 200 or sorry hundreds and some of these other 200s. And so then my thing was like, can I push myself into these more austere environments like Badwater where it's really hot, or in the winter? And so like I said, the spine race, I don't know if you guys know that, but it's
Hmm.
273 miles, finishes up in Scotland, and it's like, Britain's hardest race or Europe's hardest race or something. And it's hard because it's
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
like 33 degrees and raining, right? It's cold, you're wet, and it's just like nasty. And then we had lots of snow. So anyway, so that was tough. And then on the Iditarod Trail, so the first year I ran it with towing a sled. I don't know if you guys know the Iditarod Trail Invitational is 350
Hmm.
miles, goes from Anchorage up to McGrath. It's the baby because there's 1,000 mile
Yeah,
version
there's a
as
thousand
well.
mile version of it. Yeah.
So yeah, so I ran that and was pretty cool. Ended up linking up with a guy who'd won it, I think 6 times or 8 times before this guy, Dave Johnson, and we ended up co-winning it together, which was pretty cool. We were trying to chase a guy down. That's a whole story in and of itself. And then went back, I think 2 years later, and ended up biking it on a fat bike, which was cool. And then I tried the third discipline, skiing, and I do a lot of backcountry skiing, so I'm good at like basically skinning, but
Hmm.
normally uphill, not like flat or down. And
Hmm.
so the ski was super challenging. So so long story short, that I did the ski last year. So this winter I didn't have anything to that was I wasn't going back to Alaska, so I ended up doing a fat bike race called Fat Pursuit
Hmm.
in Idaho, and then I actually I'm normally pretty good at like just continuing to move and finish these things, but I ended up DNFing because there was just I way underestimated. It was, I think, supposed to be 140 miles long, and they shortened it to I think 100 something because there was tons of fresh snow. They hadn't plowed. All these snowmobiles were
Hmm.
coming through, just tearing up the trail. My seat post kept falling, so I like couldn't get purchase on. So it was just like a disaster. So I ended up. I normally don't sleep the first night on anything, and I was so tired. I pulled out my sleeping bag. I had a negative 20-degree sleeping bag, and just pulled on the side of the trail, just shoveled some snow out, and put my bag down at 4 a.m. Woke up at 7 a.m. Looked at my temperature gauge, and it was negative 40. It was freaking
Mm.
cold, and it was way out there. So that was like a really, honestly, even for me, who I've spent a lot of time in the mountains, like that was like a real gut check. Like, hey, can I actually survive in these like really extreme temperatures? So so then because I was just kind of licking my wounds after that, I said, oh, is there something else in the winter that I could do? And so I went out back kind of nearby into Wyoming, the Wind River Range, and ran a 100-miler there called uh, oh shoot, I can't remember it. My buckles up there. Oh, the Drift. Yeah, the
Mhm.
Drift 100. So Toda sled. So anyway, so that was back in I think March, and so from there, I mean, I was just doing kind of normal, my like kind of neighborhood runs. Hadn't really done
Mhm.
tons of long stuff. My wife, she finished Orcas Island 100-mile this year, which was great because she didn't complete it last year, and so this was her second 100-miler that she completed, and I ran the last 50 with her, so that was pretty fun. So, long story short, I had put in some mileage, but it wasn't like crazy, like race specific training going into
Mhm.
Tahoe. So that was a very long answer to your question.
That's perfect. What did you expect to get out of it? I mean, I know you came in with like a different approach, maybe not like the full charge, not the full head of steam, right? So you kind of like came in with a different mentality than you have other events. I know that for a fact, but can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, my mindset's always just like I want to finish this thing. I really do pride myself on, hey, and I have DNF some things, but I'm pretty good at just like, hey, let's not get over our skis. Let's just keep moving. Let's stay hydrated. Let's keep eating. And that's been a successful strategy. And just sometimes good things happen, and that's when, I've had, some success. So that was my mindset, just like, hey, let's just ratchet back like 10% or 20%. So I just started in the back, just was chatting with people, getting to know people. And that's what I love about these races, because,
Hmm.
and especially the 200s, because it's this, yeah, as you guys know, it's like this cool little community. And so, it was getting to know people and catching up with old friends. And yeah, just decided, hey, I'm just going to keep it, just keep it back 10, 20%. And so the big change in strategy though was to sleep the first night, because I normally just try to just plug away until I'm just like totally destroyed and then just start taking dirt naps. And I said, hey, I'm going to sleep 90 minutes the first night. And I did. And I actually woke up. I felt pretty good. And so kept moving. And then the second night, I set my alarm again for 90 minutes, and I woke up after 88 minutes. No joke. Like literally like the body, the circadian rhythms, just this 90-minute sleep cycle. And I actually felt pretty good. And it was Father's Day, and my kids had put some gifts inside my drop bag. And so, opened those up. So that gave me a little boost. And then the third night, I tried to sleep 90 minutes, but it was at an aid station where it wasn't really designed for sleep. They had a cot there, but people were
Mm.
talking and stuff, and I was just like kind of ready to be done. So I slept for 60 minutes and then was out of there. So yeah, so it ended up, I actually felt pretty darn good coming in. Like just did not push super hard. And I mean, I'm 47 now. Like my goal is to stay healthy, and I've had knee issues and hamstring issues and all kinds of stuff over the past you know years. And so my goal is, I didn't want to like just totally destroy my body, because I've want to chase around my kids and keep up with them.
Yeah, I think it's super important. The way you race makes a huge difference on the impact on your body, and then it really depends what your goal is when you race something. You want to be the fastest? Well, you got to wreck your body a little bit. You want to have a good time and feel good? I'm gonna sleep the first night. In the grand scheme of thing, 90 minutes sounds like a lot when you're taking that nap instead of 60 minutes, but really I don't know what was your finishing time, but plus or minus 90 minutes on these races, not that big of a difference, but the difference on how you feel is
Yeah,
huge. And the recovery also, you push too hard, and obviously you have some pretty strong finish in general. So you've pushed, like you have nothing to prove at this point,
yeah,
obviously. So yeah, what was
yeah.
your
Thanks,
time
guys.
out of
It was 75 hours. I thought I could do it in
with?
72, but
Oh,
the freaking descent coming off of whatever this hill, just yeah, the power line was super sandy and just nasty. So that was a bit of a kick in the pants. But yeah, so I mean, I did pretty well. I mean, I didn't know if
yeah.
I'd be out there for 5 days or whatever, and So yeah, I think there is a fine line between, and I'm always kind of asking myself, like, am I doing, does this hurt or am I doing permanent damage?
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a razor edge, as you guys
Yeah.
know.
I mean,
And
it's the difference between being hurt or hurting, I think.
yeah,
Like it's pain or injury. And like it's pretty similar. And then seeing the difference is tricky. But if you want to keep doing these cool adventure, you can't get injured too bad. So you got to watch out.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I also, I mean, just on that point, the other thing that I try to do a lot of is, um, one, hot yoga. Like I am I mean, I'm trying to do hot yoga 2 or 3 times a week now, and I think it actually hurt me during the pandemic because I couldn't. I was doing like Peloton, classes at home,
Mhm.
but it's just not the same. Like I love hot yoga because not that I love sweating like half a gallon each time, but that it's just, I think it's so good for all of for stability, for back strengthening, all of these things. So I'd say that's important. One other tool that I've used quite consistently recently, and the second one is strength training, just getting in the gym and, just working, full body. I mean, core and arms,
Mhm.
legs, all of those things. I had knee issues. Oh, this is going right into the pandemic. I actually had PRP done on my knees. I don't know if you guys have heard about
Mhm.
that plate replacement protocol. I think it is because my knees had been hurting, and that I think helped, as well as I started doing knee strengthening stuff using the knees over toes guy
Mhm.
kind of mindset. I don't know if you guys are shaking your head, but for
Yep.
viewers who might not know, this guy Ben, he's got this whole Instagram channel, and his idea is like when you're taught to squat, you're like, no, never get your knees in front of your toes, right? And
Mhm.
his mindset is, or his methodology is, hey, your knees are gonna be in front of your toes if you're like stepping up high on a rock, like you're scrambling over something, and so you need stability in that knee, and so you should be using weighted exercises like deep knee lunges, actually pulling a sled backwards in the gym, which is like the most boring thing to do ever, and I get looks all the time. But he's like going to the gym at 6 a.m. and let's pull a sled back and forth across the gym. Like that is not fun. But that, honestly, going into Hardrock last year or 2 years, yeah, I think it was last year. I mean, that saved me because I had my knees were not in good shape going into that, and I ended up coming out okay.
And how long you said was it like from the pandemic? You said that you started to implement these other strength training or these other exercises like the yoga and the strength training to kind of supplement your outdoor activities.
Yeah, yoga I've been doing, I mean, really since I got up here, probably like, 13 years. Uh,
Okay.
and so I've been doing it a lot, but during the pandemic, I just, couldn't do it. And then I've always, like, I learned to lift when I was at West Point. I had a
Hmm.
roommate who was like 230 pounds, and just, I weighed like 130, and he would like force me to drink milk and take me to the gym. And just like, I like gained like 30 pounds my first year of muscle. And so I learned kind of the fundamentals of lifting. And, especially for people that aren't used to going to a gym, they're like, man, well, there's all kinds of crazy stuff around here. Like, what do I do? But I think that that's so important. I try to get to the gym a couple days a week, and then I built a little home gym during the pandemic. And so just, I have this kind of 30 to 40 minute online program that I'll just jump on and just try to just hammer through it. Because the thing is, I'm a pretty self-motivated guy, I think. But even for me, like if I'm in my garage and it's just like, oh, I'm going to go like do chest today, I'll get distracted and like, oh, I'm going to go like clean this thing. But just like having something that just like keeps you on task, I think even for me is super important.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think that's great. I think it's a great process of what you do outside of the workouts, right? So we always talk about like your accolades and the big mountains and the big sled pulls and stuff like that, but it's the little things that are keeping you in the game that really complement that. Gavin, I wanted to talk. I want to talk about your adventure race here coming up in Alaska. But first, let's tell the story about how we met, because it's actually kind of interesting and fairly a little bit funny. Maybe you'll tell your side first, and then I'll fill in my gaps on my end, what my recollection of it was.
Yeah. That is a funny story. I tell that story actually all the time. So, um, I'd run the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim with a couple of great grad school buddies, and had an awesome time with them. And a couple of years later, and this is back in, I mean, 2008 maybe, or something like that, maybe 2007. So it's a long time ago. And then I was, at the time I was, I think, working for Expedia, and I had some teams spread between kind of like, I forget where, but like Nevada and Utah. And long story short, instead of flying, I was like, you know what? I'm going to rent, if I rent a car, I could probably go by the Grand Canyon and do a quick rim to rim to rim, and then like go to my next like site to check it out. And so I rented one of those Kia Souls. You ever seen these things? They're tiny, and I'm not a big guy. I'm like 5'7" with thick socks on, and so I was just gonna sleep in the back of this thing, and I was like in the fetal position, like crumpled up in this thing, and I think I showed up at like, the trail, the start of the, right there by the trailhead, Bright Angel or whatever, at like, midnight, and I was gonna get up at 4 a.m. And so I'm like kind of in a bivy sack, like kind of just in the fetal position and curled up in the back of this thing. And so my alarm goes off, and put my headlamp on, and I'm shining around, get my stuff ready. And I see a headlamp outside the car, like bouncing around. And I was like, that's kind of weird. Like, who else is out here at like 4 a.m.? And so I open the door and I look out and I see this guy, and he's got running stuff on. And I'm like, hey, are you running today? He's like, yeah. I was like, are you going across the canyon? He said, yeah. I said, are you coming back? He said, yeah. I was like, well, you want to run together? And that was Brian. And so we ended up running across the big ditch and back.
Yeah, it was super.
That's how I remember it, Brian.
Yeah, it was super random. So I have the beginning of my story is that I had 6 buddies. We were going to run across the Grand Canyon. In 8 weeks' time, we were going to run across the Grand Canyon. And every week, one of them kept backing out. And so it went to 5, to 4, to 3. And with like 2 weeks left, I think it was Mark, if I'm not mistaken, a friend of ours, currently was the last one to back out. And he said, I can't make it work. And I said, all right. And so my wife said, like, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to the Grand Canyon. And so I drove my car 12 hours to the rim. I probably showed up 30 minutes before you at 11:30. And I was in the back of my little tiny car. I got the seat down, I got the sleeping bag, the same exact thing. I pop out at 4:00 in the morning. I go into the porta potty, and I see this. I come out of the porta potty, and there's a headlamp moving around in the parking lot. And then we had this conversation, right? So we ran 12 hours and 5 minutes across the Grand Canyon and back. We were fairly evenly matched. Luckily, you said you were out of shape, and I was actually in okay shape. So I was able to hang with you. So, but we ran 12 hours, 5 minutes all the way across the canyon and back. I think we had dinner at one of those fancy restaurants before we parted ways. And I want to say that was 2013 or 2012. It was one of those 2 years, and I can't recall. I was trying to think of it just before we hit the record button, but I couldn't recall what year it was. So it was a long time ago, and we've kept in touch ever since. I think one time you did one of the events that you've done is Arrowhead 135, and I'm really interested in that one. So I asked you about your sled, because you built a little custom sled in your garage or something like that, with some tarp in your sled. And you hooked me up with a guy that's helped me out with my website for my coaching business. So we've kind of connected over the years consistently. And we even talked about doing a reunion run across the canyon.
Let's do it, man.
Yeah. Well, we're going to do it on the 10th anniversary, but that's come and gone. So
that's funny. Yeah, no, it has been awesome to just get to know you over such a short, but 12 hours is a fairly long amount of time. But and then just to be able to stay in touch. I mean, that's what I love about this whole community. It's just we share this common bond of just trying to get out and adventure.
Yeah, it was just so random, but you could see that we've kept in touch for over 10 years, and here we are talking again. So it's been nothing but great. The community's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about Alaska. What are you going to do here at Alaska? Tell us about maybe some of the disciplines that you're going to do at this adventure race, and how far away is it from today?
Yeah, it starts in just over like just over a week from now. So I'm leaving on Saturday. We're going to go up to Anchorage with my family and do some like kayaking and glacier viewing and stuff like that. Because my family, so I've been to Alaska, well, 4 times because I did Susitna 100 as kind of my starter. Maybe I think I did that before Arrowhead, but then I've taken the family up for the last 2 Iditarods and we've gone, ice fishing and dog sledding and all this other stuff. So they've only seen it in the winter, and I've only seen it in the winter as well. So we're going to go do kind of the Alaska summer tour, and then the adventure race starts, and it's called Expedition Alaska. It's a 5.5, 6-day adventure race, and so the disciplines are, well, first of all, it's all orienteering, so no GPS, and it's so map and compass. And you get maps like 12 hours beforehand, or we don't even know how long ahead of time we'll know. It's a team event, so everybody runs together, and they have different kind of categories. We have a 4-person team, all guys. They're all actually West Point. We're all West Pointers and Ranger qualified. The other 3 are Special Forces guys. And so, and they're younger than me. So, but I have more experience. So anyway, it's going to be fun to work together to get through this thing. But yeah, so you're basically trying to get from one transition point to another transition point, finding checkpoints along the way, which you have to navigate to with a map and compass. And the different disciplines are mountain biking, trekking, basically on foot, some sort of, running if we actually feel like it. And then pack rafting, and then glacier travel as well. So towards the end, we think we'll have to travel across, we know we'll have to travel across a glacier. So ropes, pickets, axes, all that stuff. So yeah, it's going to be quite an adventure. So I did a big week-long one in New Zealand called God Zone. This is, probably 6 years ago or something. And then one called Expedition Oregon a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just really enjoy, one, the team aspect of it, two, all the multidisciplinary aspect, of things. And then the gear, like I have a lot of gear. I love gear. I don't have gear just for the sake of having gear. I love gear enables me to get out and see places. And so then the strategy around, hey, what are we going to need for this section? How long is it going to take? How much food do we take? All of that sort of stuff. So it's so engaging from a mental standpoint. And that's what I've really been enjoying, because like Tahoe was beautiful. The scenery was amazing, but I could really just turn my brain off. I listened to a ton of books actually and podcasts, and, it was just great just to be kind of immersed in, just like checking things out. But there was no navigation. I mean, it was just like, there's a flag every so often. With these adventure races and orienteering things, I mean, you literally have to be on, like, as soon as you like kind of just take your mind off and like, oh, we're going to cruise down this trail here, all of a sudden you miss the turn and you're like, where the F are we?
Have you raced with these guys before? How close are you to them? It seems like you really need to have a lot of trust in your buddies for something like that.
Yeah. We did a 6-hour race. So one of them lives close by here. He's about 30 minutes away in Washington. I live in Issaquah, just east of Seattle. One guy's in Alabama. He's still in the Army. And then the other guy's in Boston. He's still a special forces officer and is studying. He's a grad school. So they actually flew out back last November, and we did this like 6-hour race. And so that was a good kind of training thing. But of course we weren't tired and hungry. And knowing that these guys, we've been through, West Point, you share this common bond of challenging things. And then Ranger School, basically, I mean, I don't know how much you know about Ranger School, but it's basically trying to simulate combat conditions for infantry officers to be, sleep deprived, hungry, and then go execute missions. So I know, and then especially with their special forces training, I feel confident that we'll make it happen.
You guys have a lot of like similar training, even though you may have not have done the training together. I mean, from the military background, I get that. And how does a team dynamic work? Like, do you guys take turns as being the lead guy, or do you have you figured out in your 6 hour test run last November, like whose strength is what, and they're just kind of like that's your focal point. You're going to be the gear guy, and the other guy is going to be the nav guy, or how does that team dynamic work?
It's super important. I'm glad you asked. And this is where I've learned my lesson on some other adventure races, why division of labor is so important. Because if everybody's the navigator, it doesn't work. You need a primary navigator and you need a backup. And you need a team leader who's basically stepping back from the situation, kind of assessing, hey, they may be keeping kind of their eye on the map, but they're generally like, hey, is everybody drinking? Everybody eating? How's everybody's gear? And then somebody thinking about like all of the different, logistics. Hey, when we get to this checkpoint, what do we need to take running shoes? Do we not? So that distribution of labor is super critical. So we still have to figure out like how we're going to handle each of the legs. I think we will rotate actually navigational duties, because I've never been the lead navigator on one of these races. And that is the most critical role, because if it doesn't matter how fast you're going if you're in the wrong place, right? So I've been kind of fortunate to have been part of these teams with really strong navigators, but then I haven't had to be. So part of my goal for this year is actually to really improve my navigation skills. I mean, I would say like above average, but I just really want to be like a freaking rock solid navigator. And also, just funny story, they were fortunate to have this Cascade Orienteering Club up here in the Pacific Northwest. I took my son, he's 9. We went on a little navigation race last night. It was like 2 hours. And so, he's out there with the map and compass. And I'm like, okay, he's pointing it this way. I'm like, okay, is that north? He's like, oh, pull the compass out. Look, oh yeah, there you go. And so I'm super excited about orienteering, because even for me, I mean, I'm like always Google Maps, like, oh, just follow it blindly. Like, we really, as humans, I mean, part of our DNA is like knowing where the heck we are in space. And we've just been so, even me, like I said, personally, have been so just coddled with technology. Like, I think knowing where we are in space is so important. So I'm trying to inculcate that into my kids as well. So anyway, that's a roundabout answer, but long story short, I'm excited to rotate through these navigational duties. And then I'm also going to do Expedition Oregon with another team in September, and there I'll be the lead navigator. So Alaska is going to be a good opportunity to do part of that. We'll probably break it up. Like, I have a map board on my bike, so it's basically like a piece of plastic that sits on top of the handlebars, and so you put the map on there. And so I've got one, and so I'll probably do the bike sections, and then one of the other guys will do, we'll rotate through like the trek and the packraft sections.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love the way that you kind of have to rotate through it, and it seems like you might get some mental fatigue from navigating, like being the sole navigator the whole time. So changing the duty to somebody else, and maybe now you're just the sneaker guy, and the sneakers are important as well. So it's not just the sneaker guy, but the gear guy,
because
right?
it's super mentally taxing. You have to move just as quickly, but you also are like, your head's down. And especially it's crazy on the bike, because you're like half the time you're looking at the down and not trying to like go over the handlebars. And so, yeah, you need that relief to rotate through. And so, like I said, on other races, I've had these navigators who were like savants, and they were just like so good that I couldn't even keep up in terms of like, if I had the map to keep up. So again, for me, my ethos is I'm curious. I want to learn, and just because being a beginner is so fun. You know what I mean? Like, your learning curve is like this when you start learning something. And then, go from like, make it up, go from like 0 to 80% probably takes just as long as going from 80 to 90% on something. So I love to be in that kind of 0 to 80% range on stuff.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love that as well. I enjoy the process of watching others in like the coaching business. I see like that new athlete show up and that 0 to 80. Yeah, they and I'm like, it's gonna plane out. It's gonna plane out. Like, it's not always gonna be this huge arc of growth all the time. Like, it's gonna the window is going to narrow as we get near the top of your ability. But it's fun.
Well,
It's interesting.
I'm curious, like, what do you find with, coaching? And I've never had a coach, and I've thought about it, and I'm just curious what you find that your coachees, what challenges them the most as they start getting into the ultra scene.
That's an interesting question. It's usually one or two ends of the spectrum. It's usually the atypical athlete that I'm trying to slow down, and they've read all the books, they see all the Instagram posts, they watch all the influencers, and they want to go out for 5 hours every day. And I'm trying to put the brakes on them. I'm like, hey, we need a rest day. It's not all boats and logs and all that kind of stuff. Like it is, there's a process to it. You need to recover. You need to have hard days and then easy days, hard days and easy days, and then a recovery built into that process. And even like the weekly structure and then the monthly structure, so like just different points of view or different levels. And then the new one who's just completely green on the other end, like just doesn't like, I'll just run 30 minutes nice and easy every day because it just seems like it's a good starting point. But then you have to challenge them to go a little bit harder. Okay, let's add in a little bit of intervals. If you did 30 minutes last week, let's try 35, 40 minutes this weekend, on Saturday. So it's kind of both ends of the spectrum, and you're trying to get them to like align almost to a center point. And they really come in from both ends. There's nobody like really in the middle. So that's the process for coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I ask is, people ask me all the time about, just this, how do you go this far? And I talk a lot about it. It's an eating contest, and I really do think like just being able to like consume enough calories to kind of keep you going is so important. And I find that that's what hurts, people when they get in these longer distances. They might be super fast on shorter stuff, but then when they get a longer stuff, they get nauseous or they just can't eat, and they haven't really trained how to eat. Like, hey, can you go eat half a pizza and then go run 5 miles? Like that is training. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's why I go back to Dean Karnazes, with Ultra Marathon Man, we get like the pizza delivered out in the middle of nowhere. And he's like eating it, and I was like, maybe this is like the secret. It was funny because I did this. Sorry, I'm going down this like nutrition path thing. This big eye-opening thing that I did back in the day was, I think I'd only run a 50 miler up to that point. I'd never run a kind of a formal 100. Cascade Crest was up here in Washington. It was my first 100, but I'd been training for an Ironman, and I'd also climbed Rainier a few times and met these guys, and they were talking about this thing they wanted to do called the Rainier Triple Threat. It was basically to bike from Seattle down to Rainier, which is about 115 miles, and then climb the mountain up and down and then run around it, the 93-mile Wonderland Trail. And they called it the Triple Threat. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds just mind-boggling. And one guy, he was a North Face sponsored ultra runner named Sam Thompson. He'd actually run 51 marathons in 50 states in 50 days prior to Dean doing it. And this other guy, Brock Avery, he'd run Hardrock. So anyway, these are like, I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are amazing. But they hadn't climbed Rainier. Maybe they climbed it one time. So I was like, hey, maybe I could join you for like the bike ride, because I've been training for Ironman, and maybe I could, help you on the climb. And then, maybe I could hang on the run. So anyway, long story short, we did this thing. But the reason I bring up the story is we were biking up through the hills going up towards Rainier, and there's just like these crappy little, grocery stores. And I went in looking for like Power Bar. This is like back in Power Bar days. And so I finally found some granola bar thing, and I come back out, and these guys have pork chops and they're just like gnawing on these pork chops. So I'm like, what are you doing? Like, no performance food? They're like, no, real food. That's what you need. So that was kind of this thing that flipped in my mind, like, hey, we need to be able to consume, just a lot of calories and being able to gut through it. And so anyway, it kind of reminded me, just because I think about, especially people getting into this and wanting to go longer distances. I think that nutrition, people put it in the nutrition bucket. I think it's just like, it's a freaking eating contest. You just got to be able to hammer.
Yeah, I mean, Coach, yeah, go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. And the commonality that I hear also, like between Brian saying like a lot of people overtrain and a lot of people don't realize the importance of eating. I think there's a lot of misconception in general, but also there's almost like a denial of reality or physiological need. And you hear
Mm.
people saying like, I'll run fasted. It's like great, you can do a marathon like that. It's great. Like try 200 mile. It's not gonna go well. Like we know that, but oh no, but it's all in your hands. Like, well, you have to have the right mindset to push further than what your body would want to, but there is a limit. You gotta consume these calories. You gotta
Yeah.
eat, and it sounds easy, but like I guarantee you're gonna either shit yourself or you're gonna puke if you didn't practice for that. Like that's just the
Yeah.
reality. There's no amount of I'm a tough guy, I carry the boat, that will prevent you from shitting yourself or puking. And once you do, you're gonna struggle. So you gotta train these things. And it sounds easy to say like, oh man, like I can everyone, I say exactly what you say. Like ultra running is an eating contest with a little bit of power hiking. It was like, oh well, I'm a great eater. I was like, yeah, well, you try. Like you try.
Yeah.
It
Yes.
sounds
Yeah.
easy. Like sure, you can eat a full pizza and a pint of ice cream when you're not running, but now do it when you're running, and all of
Yeah.
a sudden it's not that easy. You have to understand. And we often say, or I'll often say to people, like eat as much as you can, but it doesn't mean eat too much. Like there's a too much eating. It's not that you're consuming too many calories. It's just that at some point you're gonna have too much sugar in your body, and like
No.
that's in your gut. You're not absorbing that. Like it's bacteria in your gut, and now it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
I.
No, and don't get me wrong. I mean, the reason I just emphasize like the extreme of like just trying to eat a lot is because I see
Oh,
most people, and even for me, it's hard. I mean, it's like this is the 82nd granola bar I'm eating, like choking this thing down. I'm just like, I cannot eat another freaking thing. So that's why variety. I don't think
yeah.
I didn't eat a single gel, chomp, anything at Tahoe. I ate like this granola bars I got from Costco. I ate like red licorice, pistachios, just like variety, just like having that stuff that's like, okay, that way it's just not, somebody that, because I used to, show up, hey, I've got like, yeah, I have 3 flavors of goose for, 50 miles. I'll be, that's like, oh my God,
Yeah,
that's what
you
you
you plug that flavor at some point. I have a
do.
flavor like the orange goo gel. If you want to see me sick, just make me smell it. Like
Yeah.
it's gonna happen. Like it's not. Nah, I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Years
Yeah.
What's your
ago, yeah.
favorite food now, Simon, on these races that you do?
Eh, whatever works will work, and I cannot predict it. Like I wish I had a go-to, but it's often I will start with gels of any flavors, and then at some point just the idea of having a gel just sounds disgusting, and then I'll move towards something else. Coke, for whatever reason, always works, so I
Mm.
guess that's my favorite food. But you can't just run based on that, so then it's variety, like you say, variety. Like real food sometimes is good, but sometimes it's frustrating. I remember at Cocodona, and I'm curious, Brian, if you like the last aid station, there's Pete's meat, and you can have anything you want. And if I was not at mile 240, I would stay there, I would hang out, I would eat. It would be so awesome. But when I was there, I was like, I can't eat right now. Like I had a little bit,
Mm.
but my stomach just like it's not appetizing anymore. Unfortunately, because it was amazing food, I'm sure, but I just couldn't.
I'm pretty similar to you, Gavin. I like the real food. I actually I don't think I've had I have a gel like in my pack at all times. It's like the backup plan, the
Yeah.
emergency backup plan. And I'd actually be it's been in there so long I'd be hard pressed to eat it as an emergency. Like it's been in there for it's probably expired, it's old, it's it's probably half the calories, so that might tell you what brand it is.
Yeah.
Uh, but where I'm going with it is that to answer the question you asked, Simon, I am on a hot streak of Fig Newtons. I don't know why
Yeah.
they're like rib sticking. They're easy, right? And that's like on the trail. But when I'm in the aid station, especially like a destination trail type of event or the Cocodona ones with these big aid stations with lots of food, I'm eating whatever they have. Cheeseburgers. I ask for one and I get one for to go, and I'm throwing down some calories. And it might be hard for the first hour to get moving after those aid stations, but otherwise, I think it helps for the next 5 hours later, where I'm still able to move and I'm not just kind of flat and dead. Yeah, and I'm eating the same thing: granola bars. I like my kids. We have the same age kids, and so my kids were eating for a while the fruit snacks, like the Welch's fruit snacks,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I stick a bunch of those in there, and so I go back and forth. I have like one side of my vest is like sweet, and the other side of my vest is savory. So I
Oh,
can
that's
kind of
smart.
like balance it out. Be like, all right, like I got a little sugar burn, so let's wash that down with a granola bar of some sort. That's not so sweet, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I like the salt and savory distribution. That way, you're not overloading on one or the other. I will say the other great thing about you just had mentioned destination trail races. I mean, Tahoe was amazing because one, Candace just, and I actually listened to your podcast with her when I was on Tahoe, which was kind of cool. And she just does such a good job on her team with the aid stations and the coordination. I mean, like I said, I ran, I think, Bigfoot and Moab the first years, and these are not easy races to, like, I mean, especially Bigfoot. Even like satellite phones wouldn't work because you're in these like deep canyons.
Mm.
But just the food that these guys put together in the middle of nowhere is awesome. They had milkshakes at Tahoe, which was amazing. Those went down really well, like root beer floats. Yes, that was a treat. So, that's the other cool thing about these races is just these kind of surprises. Like, oh, milkshake, like I could go buy down at the store, but then you're in this middle of this race, and it's like, oh my gosh, this magical.
Yeah, I think you get spoiled with that. Like, if you run too many good event organized by good organization, you get used to that, and then you randomly go to a race where all they have at the aid station are Ritz cracker and some Smarties, and it's like some M&Ms. Like, I don't think I can finish the race on only that, but I guess I'm gonna try. And it's always a shock for me because I've raced a lot of really good ones where, yeah, you want a cheeseburger, you have a cheeseburger. Next aid station is gonna be like a tacos or whatever. It's like, wow, like this is literally a restaurant. And then Ritz cracker, old school, and you go drink in the river, like that's what you do. It's like, oh, okay, like
Yeah.
would have been good to know, but yeah, that's how they used to do it. They were tougher back then.
Gavin, I got a question. If we're talking about nutrition and we're talking about these races with some really nice aid stations that we've all experienced, what does it look like on the adventure racing side of things? Like, how does that work? Is it similar? Is it comparable? Or are you just eating freeze dried, reproduced food out of a pot on the trail or something?
Yeah, the way. So at the transition areas, you have a bin there. Like each person gets a 27-gallon bin, and so that moves. Again, these things are kind of convoluted because you're not like actually, or they're kind of contrived, right? You're not moving with all your gear through the entire thing. So each person gets a bin, and so you put food in there. And so the way we'll do it is like, hey, this bag has 1,000 calories, and so we that's going to last us for let's say this is like a 5-hour bag of calories, and so we think this section is going to take 15 hours, and so each of us are going to take 3 bags. And so that's one of the things we have to do in about a week from now is like all the logistical planning, like the food plan, like, hey, we're going to what are we going to actually put in these bags, and just to make it easy out there. Because like, we'll get the map and then figure out during the sections, okay, it looks like this thing is, the section's going to be 30 miles long, and how long do we think it'll take? I mean, I was in this deal in Oregon where it was a bike section, and we looked at the map. It looked like it was a good trail. It was going to take, we figured 18 hours, took us 36 hours because it was a great trail 10 years ago. And now it was like we're throwing our bike. I mean, we probably threw our bikes over like 100 deadfall, trees. It was just absolutely insane and so tiring. So we totally underestimated the number of calories that we would need during that section. So yeah, then we'll get back to the bin, and I think during the later stages they may have actually some food for us, so that'll be nice. But yeah, it's going to be a mix of Nutter Butters and granola bars and gummy bears. I don't know.
But you're solely on your own then for your calorie intake, right? So you got to create those bags and take them with you. So not like the plus shade stations, like a destination trail type of thing.
Right. Yeah. They may have food. I mean, there may be places along the way. I mean, if we get into a town, we can buy food. So, that's again, part of the adventure. So yeah, I back to what you were talking about. I think it is tough, especially now with the explosion of trail racing, since, over the past, 15, 16 years that I've done it with all these like really well run events, people can get lulled into this false sense of security by like, oh, we're going to have all this like really nice stuff. And so I always try to err on the side of like, hey, I need to be as self-sufficient as possible. And because, or else, you can get burned.
Gavin, where can our listeners catch up to you at on social media? I know you're not usually present, but I catch up with you there. So where can they find you on the social media channels?
Yeah, I post on Instagram and Facebook. So just Gavin Woody on Instagram, and I think Gavin Woody on Facebook. Try to keep it simple. My mother-in-law took Love Lighthouses 1972 or whatever, so that was taken. So just had to go with Gavin Woody.
Fair enough. I'm going to follow your mother-in-law now. Hey, we appreciate you coming on, Gavin. Always nice to catch up with you. I love hearing these stories. We'd love to have you back and always hear more accolades. You always come up with different stories, and they're always refreshing and great to hear. So thanks for coming on tonight.
Yeah, guys. Appreciate it. It's fun.
Yeah. Thanks for joining, and good luck in Alaska.
Thanks, man.
I'm Simon, and that's Brian.
We'd be thrilled to connect with you beyond our show.
For all of your endurance coaching requirement, you can reach out to Coach Brian at altitudeendurancecoaching.com.
To explore more of Simon's content, visit Running with Simon on YouTube.
Don't forget to rate, like, and share our content regularly.
Your support means a lot to us. Thanks.